Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
All right, gardening for hummingbirds. I've been working on this presentation really hard for the last month or so we'll see how it goes. First of all, there's a handout, and if you want the handout, the QR code on the screen will direct you to the handout. If you don't do QR codes, I have the address written out down at the bottom where you can go to get the handout. The handout lists all the different flowers that I'm going to recommend. It also has my resources, so hopefully it'll be helpful to you. And you can get it by going to this QR code or to the address down at the bottom of the screen. I'll give you a few seconds to either write down the address or get to the QR code. I will show this same screen again at the end of the presentation. So if for somehow you don't get the handout at the beginning, you can get it at the end. You'll get another chance. All right, I'm going to start with my sources. And these are the ones I put down. I actually use probably some others too, but the Fort Worth Audubon Society one we will be going to during the presentation. And I want to point out number 9. I did not get it on the handout. I already had the webmaster post my handout before I realized I had forgotten number 9. The Hummingbirds of Texas by Shackelford, Lindsay, and Clem. It's really a good book, and it shows all the hummingbirds that have been seen in Texas. And it's very interesting and informative. So add that to your handout if you downloaded it. Right, hummingbirds. Did you know that hummingbirds are only found in the Americas? They don't have hummingbirds in Europe. I had no idea. Generally, they come into Texas in very end of March, beginning of April, and they stay through the summer and take off again in September, October. The ruby-throated hummingbird is seen in the Metroplex technically all year long, although really basically from April through late October, not the end of October, but the 3rd week of October. A few odd facts that you might be interested in. Hummingbirds generally lay 2 eggs, and they're little bitty things like the size of a Tic Tac. And the cool thing is they build their nests out of spider webs, among other things, so that as the little baby birds grow, the nests expand with them because the spider webs stretch. I think that's really cool. They feed the baby birds protein, which is basically insects. The adults eat twice their weight every day. And I love this. If we had a hummer's metabolistic rate, we would have to eat 300 hamburgers a day to survive. I know people who might sign up for that, but that's a huge amount. It's kind of mind-boggling that they eat that amount in their foods. Hummers are very lightweight, almost never over 4/10 of an ounce. Their body temperatures range highly, 104 in the day, but at night, if they're in cold weather and trying to survive a freeze, their body can drop as low as 38 degrees, almost into sort of a hibernation. Smaller the hummer, the faster its wings beat. And I love this. Hummers can visit 1,000 to 2,000 flowers in a day, in 24 hours. And moreover, they have great memories. They remember which ones they visited and when, so they won't go back to that same flower before it has time to build up its pollen again. The nectar in the flowers, different flowers take different amount of times to build the nectar back up. So, and they do their pollination when they put their tongue into the flower. They get the pollen and spread it to the next flower. To attract hummingbirds, there are some definite strategies that you might want to follow. First of all, hang up feeders. It seems obvious, but it's a way to attract hummingbirds. The feeders will do better if you put them in the shade, make them red. Pick really small ones that don't hold very much, especially in our area, because you need to change the feeders, the stuff in the feeders often. I'm going to click on this link because there's a chart on this website that I found absolutely fascinating. I'm going to scroll down. Look at this. I had no idea about this. If you live in 70 to 75 degrees, I can wait and change the feeder about once a week. However, look down at the bottom. That's us. 92 degrees plus, that's nearly every day for
Camille,
us in the summer.
Camille,
Yeah.
it hasn't come up for us to see.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what it says. It says if it's 71 to 75 degrees, you need to change it almost every week. And if you change it, if you live in 92 and plus degrees, we need to change it every day. That's how often we need to put new hummingbird water in our feeders. All right. Select a feeder with an easy to clean mouth if you're going to be cleaning it daily, and use a location that cuts down on fighting. If you hang your hummingbird feeders, 2 or 3 of them close together, and you get the right hummingbird, he'll try to guard all 3 feeders and not let anybody get there. But if you hang them farther apart where they can't guard them all at the same time, you'll cut down on the fighting. 4 cups of water to 1 cup of sugar is the current recommended amount. Used to be 3 to 1, but they've changed it. It's 4 to 1 now. And don't put any red dye. If it's bad for us, it's not good for them either. No honey. That can cause them to have an infection, which can kill them. And do keep your liquid refrigerated when it's not in the feeder. Plant nectar flowers that have bright colors, especially tubular flowers. They're especially fond of that. Red, orange, pink, purple. Native plants are good not only for the hummingbird, but for our water. Native plants take a lot less water and grow in our native agricultural conditions. If you deadhead, that encourages more blooms. And you want as many blooms as possible. Do mass plantings, not just 1 or 2 plants. Bright colors accessories. I've gone out in the yard where the hummingbirds are with a red shirt on, and they come up and check me out, to see if I've got nectar. So bright colored accessories as well as bright colored flowers can lure the hummingbirds in. Attracting hummingbirds, you need to schedule your blooms. Take note of when something blooms and schedule it so you have something for each season blooming at the right time for the hummingbirds. Plant in mass. Vines and trellises can add to your attraction because they provide another area where hummingbirds can nectar. Use bright colors. Water features are good, but don't think about a bird bath as much as misters or spray. I've been out in the yard watering the garden and have a hummingbird fly through the spray in my water. So they like to rub against wet leaves. So wet down the leaves and allow them a chance to rub against them, and have misters and other things that spray. Perches are good. I get a kick out of looking at the picture on the lower left. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rufous hummingbirds all sitting on this cable that's sitting across the yard. So they like to perch. They preen, they sleep, and if it's the mean bully, he gets on the perch and guards the other feeders. I know as gardeners, it's really hard to say this, but encourage insects. Hummers love like gnats and mosquitoes, and that is great. Insects provide the protein, and about 30% of their diet is insects. And the baby hummers eat all insects, they are fed insects. So don't use insecticides. Allow the baby hummers and the hummers to eat up your insects, and leave up spider webs because they make good nesting material. Took this picture ages ago in Sedona, Arizona. This is a hummingbird nest, and this nest was built over a doorway into a restaurant. I mean, hundreds of people were walking, what, a foot below this nest, and didn't bother the hummingbirds one bit. They were zipping in and out, taking care of the nest. They will nest in hanging baskets, on a fork of a limb of a shrub. They like hackberry and oak trees, but they'll also get on wires and ropes, sprinkler heads, and nearly anything else in your yard. Nesting materials, don't put out dryer lint, strings, or yarn because those absorb water and then the nest won't be waterproof. They do like cattails and willow, other plants that are fuzzy like the blooms on a dandelion, and salsify. That bloom looks like a dandelion bloom once they've gone to seed. The dandelions, they get globular seed heads, and that's what they like. And the salsify looks the same, except it's like 3 or 4 inches in diameter. Clean pet hair works, but be sure don't put out any that has flea or tick stuff on it. Spider webs are good. And they like quiet, peaceful areas. If you have a lot of barking dogs, screaming kids, or other hollering and noise, they're probably not going to come to your yard. So try to avoid noisy things. They like quiet. Texas hummingbirds. Would you believe there are only like 360 or so hummingbird species in the whole world, and they're all in the Americas? Only 27 of those, very small percent, live in the United States. Most of them live in Mexico, Central, and South America. Only 17 varieties have ever been seen in Texas, and of those, only nine of them were just barely seen. They just have a few sightings, and the vast majority of those sightings are down along the Gulf Coast, down in South Texas, or along the Trans-Pecos. Only 8 are regular in Texas, and of those, only 2 have a normal range in Fort Worth area. Those 2 hummingbirds, well, let's see, if my other thing I tried to load didn't load, let me try this. If it doesn't load, I won't load anything else. We'll see if I can get this to load. This is the Fort Worth Audubon Society.
No, it didn't load. It didn't load, Camille.
Okay. I'll tell you what it says. It's the Fort Worth Audubon Society. And if you go there, go to the section called Birding Resources. And what they have is a chart which will show you by season what hummingbirds are in our area. And when you look over all 4 seasons, the only 2 in our area are the ruby-throated hummingbird and the black-chinned hummingbird. The ruby-throated hummingbird comes at the beginning of April and stays through about the 3rd week of October. The black-chinned hummingbird comes about the same time, but he's gone by the end of September. So that's it. If you want to see hummingbirds in Fort Worth, chances are these are the only 2 that you'll be able to spot. And by far the most common one is the ruby-throated hummingbird. It's also the most common hummingbird in the United States, with 35 million of them existing. They have the longest overwater migration and spend a lot of time in our area, so you can spot them. The black-chinned are harder to find in our area, but I have a friend who has a house in Possum Kingdom, and she sees them there all the time. So slightly further west, and you'll see the black-chinned. This is the black-chinned. They're in the Metroplex starting at the beginning of April. They have a lot of different habitats. They do migrate big time. but they live mainly in the western areas. Okay, I did go ahead and try to show you some of the other hummingbirds found in Texas, like the broad-tailed hummer is found. It is mostly along the Gulf Coast and along the West Trans-Pecos area. They look a lot like ruby throats. So if you see a hummingbird in our area, it's going to be the ruby throat. But if you're, for instance, in Angel Fire, New Mexico, they have a lot of broad tails, and they look basically to me just like our ruby throat, except the tail is broader, and when they flare it out, it's wider. Here's a couple of other broad tail pictures. Notice, looks like the ruby throat underneath chin is ruby, just like our ruby throats. The way you could tell the difference if you're in an area that has both broad tail and ruby throat is the broad tails make a trilling noise when they fly, the males in particular. And so if you hear this, bzz, it's the broad tail. It's not a ruby throat. And they're very common in the mountains of New Mexico. The buff-bellied hummingbird, I didn't have a picture. They're very unusual to see them in Texas. They're only usually along the Gulf Coast. The blue-throated hummer, again, along the Gulf Coast. The interesting thing about the blue throat is it has a slower wing beat. I painted a few pictures of hummingbirds a few years ago, and I was desperate, so I stuck up one of those. The calliope hummingbird is not seen in Fort Worth. They're really pretty, but look how their throat differs from our ruby throat. It's streaked and goes further along their shoulder, and it's really a beautiful rosy red color. These hummers like the calliopes like flowers that are low to the ground, and it's the smallest native bird for the United States. The rufous hummingbird is another one you could see in the mountains of New Mexico. They are bright orange. They are found in Texas, but again, along the Gulf Coast in South Texas, and some along the Trans-Pecos, but not here. More rufous pictures, a female and a male. And these birds are smaller than the ruby throat and feisty mean. They drive all the others away from the hummingbird feeders and guard them and run them away. Didn't have a picture of a lucifer, but the lucifer, it doesn't get its name from Lucifer, you know. It comes because the name Lucifer means bearer of light, and their throats are really a bright magenta, and they were named because of their throat color. Here's some other hummingbirds that are also rare in our area. They're almost never seen in our area of Texas, again, along the Gulf Coast, South Texas, and Trans-Pecos. All right, now what can you do to attract our ruby throats and black chins, which are in our area? First of all, I've listed the flowers more or less in alphabetical order. So the first one I have is ageratum. The ones you buy in the nursery are annuals. You can get wild ageratum if you look for it and dig it up and transplant it. And you can get mist flowers. Sometimes you can find that in the nursery. And these are all forms of ageratum. The ones you buy in the little 6-packs are generally annuals, but the wild ageratum and mist flower are perennials if you can find them. Sweet alyssum, it's not very happy in our area. It gets too hot. You can plant it in the spring, but it's not real heat tolerant. So that's a problem, because when do our hummingbirds get here? Well, they don't get here until April, and by then our cool spring is winding down and it's getting warmer. So alyssum may last into April, but by the time May and June get here, it's gone. So it's not a real good choice for the Fort Worth area. Bee balm grows well here, and it blooms in the summer. It's a perennial, and you can find different ones, and they're usually available in nurseries if you watch for them. Begonias, This picture is from the Dallas Arboretum, and get a red begonia. They like the red blooms in the red begonias. And you can get begonias at virtually every nursery, and you can buy some that like sun and some begonias that are for shade. And so choose your location and the correct variety for that location. They are only annuals. Bluebonnets or lupines, they grow all over Texas. They're beautiful. They like full sun. They're perennials. They're a native, and that makes them drought resistant and tolerant of our low rainfalls. They do reseed. They will come back if you have the right location for them. The picture on the lower right is kind of interesting. You don't really realize it, or I didn't until I took a class, but bluebonnets, notice how the parts at the bottom are red and the ones at the top have little white centers. That's because once the bluebonnets have been pollinated by a bee, the center turns red. The ones that are not yet pollinated are the white ones. So the centers tell you the pollination level of that bluebonnet. Celosia is really pretty, and coxcomb is part of the Celosia family. So I stuck a picture of my coxcomb up in the upper left corner. Coxcomb get that beautiful, flowy, flowery top by midsummer to late summer, and it's very attractive to the hummingbirds. Celosia gets a bushier top, and the coxcomb looks like Celosia until later summer when the cox part forms. Columbine. Columbine is a Texas native perennial. It likes morning sun. This one in my backyard is growing in front of a big pecan tree. So the pecan tree shelters it from the midday and evening sun, but it gets the morning sun. They do reseed and they will spread, but they're not invasive. Coral bells or heuchera is another perennial. It likes partial to full shade. It blooms in the summer with this little thin stalk of blooms that you'd think hummingbird would never bother, but they do. They like those stalk blooms that the heuchera puts up. Mine's in partial shade in the backyard. 4 o'clock is in, it used to be in full sun, but my oak tree is growing, and so now it's in partial shade, and it's doing okay. It doesn't take over anymore. It doesn't spread as much in the partial shade. But notice it has the nice trumpet-shaped blooms that the hummingbirds like. Pick one that's the fuchsia or orange or hot pink. The paler colors are not as good, and it is a perennial. Frog fruit is a Texas native. It's a ground cover, and I'm going to try to get some to grow in my front yard because I have lost most of my St. Augustine, and frog fruit will grow with a limited amount of sun, and it is a perennial. Frostweed, it's another Texas native. It can get huge, so you need to have a big yard to have space for frostweed. It gets blooms that have big white clusters in late summer and September, and it's also a host for a number of different kinds of butterflies. The monarchs love it, but so do the hummingbirds. Fuchsia, it's an annual. It likes shade in our area. Some parts of the world it'll grow in the sun, but our area needs shade. Blooms all summer. Most of the time when I see it around here, we have it in hanging baskets. Another tropical that needs shade, and it's a standing fuchsia. They're hard to find. You don't see them in our area very much. They bloom in June. Indian blanket, Geolardia, blanket flower. This has a lot of different names. It's a wildflower. You see it growing all over the prairies. It does reseed. It is a perennial. Blooms in, late spring, early summer, and you can get it in several different colors and varieties. Hosta. I love this plant and I hate it both at the same time. It has a pretty bloom stalk that shows up in summer. The problem is it's delicious. The slugs and snails just love it. And I have discovered if you have a pecan tree and you shell your pecans, take those pecan shells and spread them around your hostas. They will keep the slugs and snails off of them because they don't like crawling over the sharp pecan shells. It cuts them. And so it keeps the slugs and snails off. It does not keep the sow bugs off. The little round sow bugs will get on them and they'll eat them just like the slugs and snails. And I don't want to put insecticides on them because then I might injure my hummingbirds and other things that like the hosta flowers when they put them up. So it's a problem. I have trouble keeping them alive because the sow bugs get on them, even if I keep the slugs and snails off. Impatiens. Oh, they're really pretty. They are an annual. Some years they're happy as little larks and grow all summer. Other years I have trouble keeping them alive in the summer. This last summer was not an impatient summer. They need a lot of water and they come in all sorts of shades of pink. Oops, I clicked my thumb. Sorry about that. Okay, Joe Pye weed. It's an annual and it's something that gets great big. You need a lot of space if you're going to do this. Blooms in late summer. It's loved by the hummingbirds and the butterflies. The purple blooms is the most common color of bloom, but they do get big and it is an annual. Mexican petunia, however, is a perennial. And there are two kinds in our area. The pink and purple are both kinds come in both colors. The low growing one kind of mounds. It's never over a foot tall and it doesn't spread unduly. It does spread, but it doesn't take over. The taller one, however, also comes in pink and purple. It will reseed and it will just take over your flower bed if you'll let it. So I suggest if you use a taller one, put it in a place like where you can mow around the bed and keep it contained. Because if you put it in a bed with other things, pretty soon there won't be anything there but the tall petunia. Both of these are very attractive to hummingbirds, but the shorter one is much easier to contain, and they do both like sun, so you need to put them in sun. Lantana also likes sun. It'll grow in some shade, but it won't bloom nearly as much, so I recommend full sun. There are two varieties. One's an annual and one's a perennial. The perennial one usually has pinky purpley kind of mixture of flower on it. It's not a solid color flower. The solid yellow ones are almost always annuals. And there may be some newer ones now, they're perennials. But anyway, choose for your location. Would you believe I didn't have a picture of a marigold in all my 10 zillion pictures? So marigolds are good. The hummingbirds really like them. They're good in spring and early summer. But every time I plant marigolds, they get red spider mites by late June. They are croaking from the red spider mites. So use them with caution. Once you get red spider mites in your flower bed, they live in the soil and they're back next year for the marigolds again. So mint, it's a good choice. The hummingbirds really like it. You can buy some more domesticated mints that don't take over, or you can buy some of the more wilder varieties that will take over your flower bed. So choose carefully. They are perennials. Penstemons, there are a number of different varieties. Some are annuals, some are perennials. They do like full sun. You can get a variety of colors. Mostly they bloom in May. Varies a little bit, but Penta, oh, those are really good. And they bloom all summer. They were still pretty. Last time I looked in October, I could still find pentas in bloom. So it's a very good plant. It is an annual. It doesn't come back, but they bloom a long time, so they're well worth the effort. This picture happens to be from the Dallas Arboretum. Petunias. You know, they used to just bloom in the spring when it was cooler, and in the summer they'd kind of all croak. But there are new petunias that my sister-in-law always gets called supertunias. And those bloom all summer long in the heat in Texas, and you don't even have to deadhead them. They like full sun, and they'll grow in partial shade. They are an annual. Unfortunately, they won't make it through the winter. But if you get supertunias, they will bloom all summer. Phlox. I have old-fashioned garden phlox. I got the start from my mother-in-law. She said she got it from her mom. And so this has been in my husband's family for a long time. It blooms starting in late June and it blooms the rest of the summer. Although this summer it kind of died out in late August. It was getting awfully hot for it. They can get 2 to 4 feet tall. It likes full sun, but it'll grow in partial shade. They bloom starting in late June. The flowers are fragrant. You can smell them, but it's a hand-me-down plant. You got to find somebody that's got one to give you a start. I almost never see it in nurseries. You can get a start from me if you're in the neighborhood. John Fanick phlox is one of a number of hybrids based on the original garden phlox. And you can buy these in nurseries. They're good. They're perennials. They don't get as tall. They aren't as lanky. My old-fashioned one tends to get mildew in the spring, but once it gets hot, it goes away. This one doesn't usually get the mildew. It's more resistant, and you can find it in lots of nurseries. Salvias and sages. You can find numerous varieties. Go for the red, hot pink colors. Those are more attractive to the butterflies. They like full sun, and they bloom all summer. Larkspur. I love larkspur. It's an annual. It reseeds. It blooms in April and May. By June, it's fading out. By the end of June, it's gone to seed. But if you're lucky, it'll come back again next year from the seeds. It will grow in partial shade or sun. They come in purple, blue, and white. And the purple is kind of a pinky purple. Sweet pea likes full sun. It does reseed. It blooms during the summer, and it's a vine. It'll grow up your fence. You can find a start of it. Find some seeds at your local store that sells seeds. Scarlet Gilia is also called standing cypress, and the hummingbirds love this. And these several pictures are taken with hummingbirds eating this. It's a short-lived perennial or biennial. It tends to come up one year and bloom the next year, and then it dies out and you have to start again. It does reseed. Turk's cap, most people think of it as a shade plant, but look at this picture on the lower left. That was taken in the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens in the perennial garden. And that Turk's cap is in full sun, and it blooms like crazy because it gets lots of sun. It will also bloom in the shade, but not nearly as much. And nicely, it blooms all summer. In fact, when I checked up at church, the Turk's cap at my church was still blooming a week or so ago. So it's still in bloom, even though we've had a light freeze. Zinnias, they are an annual. They bloom all summer. You can buy all sorts of different varieties of it. Some will reseed, but they're not real good at reseeding. I haven't had a whole lot of reseeding. They'll grow in full sun, but they'll take a little bit of shade, not a whole lot. The butterflies love them as well as the hummingbirds. So they're really good. Okay, trees, vines, and shrubs. One of my favorites is Rose of Sharon or Althea. It's a deciduous shrub. It can be a small tree and get, I don't know, 12, maybe 15 feet tall. It likes full sun. It'll grow with some shade. It blooms all summer. It's not covered, but it'll have blooms on it all summer. It'll have both singles and doubles. Try to pick the ones that have either the purple center or the purple blooms, because the purple attracts, that deep color attracts the hummingbirds. Azaleas, that's kind of a mixed bag. My old-fashioned garden azaleas bloom when? Well, they usually bloom around spring break, which is March. And when do the hummingbirds get here? April. So it's a problem. My azaleas, the old-timey ones, tend to bloom before the hummingbirds ever arrive. However, there are some new azaleas that bloom all summer long. They're not covered in blooms, but they get blooms. And those are attractive to the hummingbirds. And so I would recommend, if you're planning for hummingbirds, get the newer varieties of azaleas that will bloom off and on all year long. They don't get as many blooms, but they're scattered through the year, so there are some for the hummingbirds. By the way, I live on the west side of Fort Worth, and azaleas do not like Fort Worth black dirt. So if you have that black dirt, planting azaleas is dicey. You have to dig all your dirt out and plant them in peat moss and pine bark mulch, and then they'll grow for a while. So azaleas are pretty dicey in our area. If you're one of the people who live in that nice acidic branch that runs along east side of Fort Worth and up north, you'll be much easier for you to grow azaleas. And they do like water. Bird of paradise tree. This is a small deciduous tree. It blooms off and on all summer, but not a whole lot of blooms. But the hummingbirds really like the blooms when it does bloom. The cardinal flower or coral bean, they have these down in the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens if you want to see one. It's a shrub and it puts these gorgeous, lanky red bracts out, and it's really beautiful. The birds love it. I love this plant. Again, you can see one down in the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens. It's called Moy Grande hibiscus, and it's not misspelled. It really is M-O-Y. It's named after somebody. It doesn't mean very grand. It means Moy. That's a person's name. It's a perennial shrub. It needs full sun, and you wouldn't believe what the blooms look like. This picture is not near as big as the bloom was. The bloom was almost as big as a dinner plate, bigger than a saucer. They're just gorgeous. And they bloom all summer. They're not covered all the time, but they get these blooms off and on all summer long, and they get a lot of blooms. Once they freeze, you should cut them way back and make them start again the next summer. Tropical hibiscus. Around here, they're just annuals. They generally don't live through our winters. They like partial shade, although you can now get some that will grow in full sun if you check the labels. They like water, but they do bloom all summer. Honeysuckle, I did not have a picture of one. I had some and I managed to kill mine. Most people can't kill it if they want to. When you know, I managed to kill mine. There are some varieties that are not as aggressive. Some of them, like the Japanese honeysuckle, will tend to take over, and it's considered an invasive species in Texas. I've seen it growing in state parks where they don't want it. The honeysuckle likes partial shade, but it does bloom in early spring. And when do our hummingbirds come? Not usually till April. And by then the honeysuckle is through blooming. So if you live in the Fort Worth area, honeysuckle really won't do you much good for the hummingbirds. Hummingbird bush, however, is good. It grows in full sun. It blooms in late summer and has trumpet-shaped blooms. Hummingbirds like this one. Hydrangeas, they're a little dicier in my part of Fort Worth, which is the west side. They prefer acidy soil. They will live in our black dirt, but they're not as happy about it. And you have to add things to it to make the blooms come out well. They do like areas that get morning sun and not necessarily full sun. They are deciduous, but the leaves turn pretty red in the fall. The oak leaf hydrangea is much more suited to my area of Fort Worth, which is the west side. They get pretty fall foliage, and they get this really pretty white bract that comes up in summer, and the hummingbirds really like that. They like partial shade. If they get too much shade, they get leggy and aren't as pretty. Passion vine. I love this flower. It is so cool. It is a tender perennial around here. It makes it through some of our winters, but not all of them. It will reseed and it can become aggressive. So make sure you put it in a place that you control it. And it does grow well. When I grew up, the neighbors had passion vines growing all along the cyclone fence on one side of Mom's yard. Mom and Dad would fight it because it would come into their flower bed and try to take over. But I love the blooms, and so did the butterflies and the hummingbirds, and it blooms all summer. Redbud trees, that's another problem tree because it's beautiful, it blooms, it's a small tree, but when do they bloom? Well, they tend to bloom about the same time as the azaleas, which is March. And when do the hummingbirds get here? April. So redbud trees bloom too early for most of our hummingbirds. Morning glories. If you have 4 o'clocks, 4 o'clocks tend to bloom in the late afternoon and evening. Well, morning glories, guess what? They bloom in the morning. So if you have some morning glories and some 4 o'clocks, you can make hummingbirds happy all day. The morning glories come in an assortment of colors, but aim for the ones that are the brighter, the darker. There's one that's kind of a light purpley fuchsia sort of color. There's the dark blue. The light blues are not as alluring to the hummingbirds as the darker ones. It is a vine, by the way. And this vine, I planted in the front flower bed and it grows all over my holly bushes, but the holly bushes don't seem to mind. And I like the morning glories. So desert willow is it's a native. It likes full sun. It is a small willow tree. They bloom in the summer. I took this picture, about 2 weeks ago. One was in bloom. I happened to stop at a roadside park along the Texas 287. And the US 287 has roadside parks ever so often, and most of them had desert willow. You can also find them. There's a food place on Montgomery Street in Fort Worth that has a desert willow in their garden, and it blooms. So desert willow is nice, it's small, and it does get those nice, bright, trumpet-shaped blooms that the hummingbirds really like. Finally, rhizomes, tubers, and bulbs. Procosmia was high on the list of recommended things. However, it can be extremely aggressive. So if you get a start of Procosmia, put it in a place where you can control it. I suggest a flower bed right in the middle of your yard where you can mow around it. And that way it won't spread where you don't want it. It's a bulb. The foliage looks like gladiolas. And it looks kind of like what might be a wild gladiola. And it blooms in May and June. And it spreads not only from seed, but from the roots. The roots spread like Bermuda grass, with runners. So be careful. If you plant that, put it where you can control it. Daylilies. I love daylilies, but choose the darker ones. They like the ones that have the darker blooms. Avoid the lighter pale yellow ones. It is a perennial. They bloom in May and June. They like full sun and partial shade, and stick with the darker colors. Same thing for iris. Stick with your darker colors. The white and yellow iris are not particularly alluring to the hummingbirds, but they do go more for the darker ones. They will grow in full sun to partial shade, and they are tubers. Lilies, they have the nice tubular shape that the hummingbirds like. The colors aren't always as attractive as might be desired, but some of the Asiatic lilies are dark enough. I love this plant. It's called red hot poker. You don't see it very often. They put up these spikes that look like a red hot poker. The top of it is red and it filters down to a pale color at the bottom. And I've seen the hummingbirds at the red hot poker. They usually bloom in June. The foliage is kind of grass-like, and you get the plants. You have to buy the plants. I tried buying the tubers one time and didn't have much luck with that, but I've had pretty good luck buying the plants. They do come back, by the way, the next year. Here are some plants that are strongly recommended for hummingbirds, but the bad news is in Texas or in Fort Worth, they don't grow here very well in the summer. I've never had one of these do well in summer here. They're cool weather plants. And when do the hummingbirds come to Texas? In the hot weather. So these don't do well in the Fort Worth area to attract hummingbirds, because by the time they're in bloom, the hummingbirds aren't here yet. The lobelia is gorgeous in northern New Mexico mountains, and the hummingbirds get on it all summer. And it dies like crazy here in our summers. It's just too hot here for it. Okay, I do want to thank all the people who helped me with this by giving me pictures that they allowed me to put in here. Bill Chapman, Nancy Pretty, Kaki Cunningham, Paige Steed, Alice Howell, Amanda Dean, Catherine Lane. All of these folks are friends of mine who took hummingbird pictures that they allowed me to put in this presentation. All the ones that came in from those, I tried to be sure I labeled them clearly. And the ones that aren't labeled, I took those. And also the flower pictures, all of those were my pictures. And so I don't label mine. They're not labeled, they're mine. I thank you very much. And here is your handout again. So if you didn't get it the first time, you can copy down the address now and go back and get that one. Don't forget to add the Hummingbirds of Texas to the resources, because I forgot to put that in my resources. Okay, thank you. Dick, are there any questions?
So far, I've just seen the one. And it says, any advice on what to do when you have multiple sparring hummingbirds in the same area feeding on the same feeders or forage? They can get very aggressive with each other. What can
You
they
know,
do?
one of the recommendations is either put out more feeders than they can fight over, like a dozen, not necessarily a dozen, but a whole bunch, or space them way out. Put one in the front yard and one in the backyard, or one on each end of the house, or 3 or 4 on each end of the house, but space them out so far away that they can't guard them all, or they're out of sight of each other. That's what I've done. I put, 2 or 3 in the back and then several in the front where they can't see each other. So one hummingbird at least can't guard all of them. That doesn't mean you don't have multiple bullies around to try to take them over. But if you get out enough feeders, they give up. I have a friend who lives in Angel Fire, New Mexico, and she has like 2 dozen feeders and gets, it's unbelievable. She makes 5 gallons of hummingbird food a day and fills up those feeders every day because they drain them dry daily. But there are so many feeders and so many hummingbirds, they don't even bother to fight over them anymore. But here, space them way out, put them out of sight of each other, and or put several together. So one hummingbird, there's no point in his guarding them because there's 3 or 4 there in a wad. I don't get enough hummingbirds in Fort Worth to do that strategy. So I haven't had a problem. I'm glad to hear that somebody's having a hummingbird fight problem because I have trouble attracting enough to have major fights here. Good luck.
Okay. And we get a comment from Josephine. She says she doesn't have any questions, but she wants to thank you. She's from Southern California, and she has a lot of these, and a lot of these hummingbirds apply to their area also.
Oh, I'm jealous. That's really cool. I wish we had more here. And no matter how hard I work, I don't see them all that often. Some, but not all that often. I see a lot more when I go visit my friend in Angel Fire. She just has scads. It's amazing.
Okay. Any more questions? Just a reminder, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation. It will be converted to a YouTube and it will be sent to you by the Tarrant Regional Water District. It may take a little while for you to get it because it'll have to be converted to a YouTube. You'll also receive an evaluation. Again, we ask that you please complete that for us also. And another Chastity says, thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed the presentation. It was wonderful. Let's see. No. Nancy says they seem to love her wisteria vine.
Yeah, wisteria can really attract them, and they will grow in this area. They are actually considered an invasive species. What is it, Chinese wisteria, I think it is. But you can get some other species of it too. Yeah, I love wisteria, but I have not had much luck with them. But I've seen them in the neighborhood, so I know that some people do. Yes.
I've got the evergreen one, and but it just blooms in the fall, so it wouldn't help the hummingbirds any.
Yeah, the hummingbirds are pretty much all gone by the 3rd week of October, and most of them are gone by the end of September. Something I read when I was doing the research for this said if you haven't seen a hummingbird at your feeder in a couple of weeks, you can take them down. They're through your area already.
Now I've heard though that if you take them down, you might want to put them back up in February or so because that's when the rufous migrates through. Have you heard that?
According to the charts that I looked at Fort Worth Audubon, they had absolutely no sighting of rufous listed in their charts.
I've never seen any. Charlie Amos is the one, who's an ornithologist, and he's the one that mentioned it.
Is he in this area?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Tell him to get it on their chart because I leaned very strongly on that chart.
Yeah.
The only two on the chart are the black chinned and the ruby throat, and they had no others ever listed on any of the other seasons of charts. Now I see the rufous all the time when I go visit my friend in Angel Fire. They have rufous, the broad-tailed, and the calliope. Those are the three most often seen up there, but especially the broadtail and the rufous. And they're tons of fun, but the rufous are mean. They take over and they'll fight all the other hummingbirds. And then they'll sit there and not even be eating on the feeder. They're just guarding it, just being mean. So, who knows?
Okay, just a bunch of congratulations on a wonderful presentations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that from
Yeah.
anybody willing to say so.
Do you ever see many honeybees or other pollinators at the feeders causing any problems?
Yes, I do. When I don't see it nearly as much in Angel Fire when I visit my friend up there as I do in Fort Worth, but you can get bee guards at the store to put in your feeders. They're these little things that go in, and the hummingbirds, have the long tongue and the long nose or beak, and they can stick it in and get it out, and the bees can't reach far enough down to get it. So go get you some bee guards at the store and put them in your feeders. That won't protect the plants, but you want the bees in the plants because they're pollinators. So try bee guards. They really help.
I've noticed also that sometimes I'll get ants if I have it on a fence, where the ants are. And I've just been told to put maybe some Vaseline along the place where they're climbing, and then that stops them. But
yeah, that does work. You can buy again a purchase or make one actually, a little thing that holds water.
a moat, yeah,
Yeah, and they can't get through the moat, and so you put the little water thing above the feeder so they can't crawl down into the feeder. And you can create your own. I've done it myself, but you can do that. That works.
yeah, that would work good too.
Yeah.
Let's see. No, I don't see any more right now, Camille. We hope everybody enjoyed the presentation.